Alrighty, folks, if you have your Bible there, if you turn to Matthew chapter 5, and verse number 5, Matthew chapter 5, verse number 5. We're going to carry on in our series. We've dealt so far with 2 of the 8 Beatitudes. We're going to carry on today with our third one. We're looking forward to looking at tonight what I've titled A Portrait of Meekness. A Portrait of Meekness. Pardon? Sign-up sheet, that's right. Brother Steve, would you mind getting a blank page of paper and just passing it around for me? And we'll take attendance tonight. Thank you for... we need to win. We need to win. I'm all over it. I'm ready for it. Exactly. So tonight we deal with a portrait of meekness, and sort of to give away a little bit at the start that we're going to read throughout. Whenever we think about the word meekness, there's a lot of different words in this world that we use. Some of them portray positive emotions within us, some negative, positive pictures, negative pictures. Whenever we think of a word like meekness, I know for us as Christians it takes on a different meaning, but the traditional sense of meekness in the world's eyes, I don't know about you, but certainly for me, and according to the dictionary that we're about to look at in a minute, it has this idea of weakness in our mind. It's not something that shows forth strength or courage or power or might. It's that sort of person that's a little bit, I don't know, do you use the word wispy in America? Wispy? No? You don't use the word wispy? Somebody that's a little bit, I've got to think of American words now. I need my Irish-English dictionary. Yeah, like, somebody. I think somebody that's a bit soft, or somebody that's a bit of a pushover or a lightweight or something like that. Wispy we use in the UK. It sort of describes somebody that would be the world's definition of meekness. We'll get to that in just a minute. Before we get into our Beatitude tonight, I want to give a little bit of an introduction to the Sermon on the Mount as a whole, and specifically the Beatitudes that we've been looking at so far. The central verse in my mind, whenever you look at the Sermon on the Mount, is Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, where the Bible tells us, "Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." Jesus, whenever he preaches and whenever he speaks through anybody, pastors, teachers, it's always a dual purpose, if you will, and they both carry an incredible importance. The second one even more so than the first. The first one is that it's to instruct us as Christians. That's the part there where it says that they may see your good works. In other words, that we may learn how to show forth our faith and to live out our faith in this world around us and the relationships with others. That's the primary purpose of teaching, one of the main reasons. But I would say the central reason of preaching is the words that are highlighted there. So it's to encourage us and to teach us how to be more like Jesus. But secondly, and most importantly, it's to bring glory to God. And as we think about these Beatitudes, they're principles and characteristics that we're trying to incorporate into our personality, if you will. We think about the first week, we talked about the difference between pride and humility, that importance of humility. And then last week, we looked at the next Beatitude as well. And this week, we're going to be looking at blessed are the meek. All important characteristics that tell us a little bit about how to live the Christian life. And most importantly, how to glorify our God in heaven. And so we come to our next Beatitude, Matthew chapter 5, verse 5, and we see that portrait of meekness that we're going to be looking at tonight. Jesus tells us these words. He says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. I've written down some words here. Hopefully some of these mean something in American rather than Irish. But it says, these are the sort of words that we would associate meekness with. We would associate it, first of all, with weakness. Somebody that's, do you use the word pansy here? Pansy? Somebody that's a pansy? We're getting there. I'm figuring it out. Somebody that's a pushover, a lightweight, puny. We know puny. I think that's an American transfer across to here. And somebody with no backbone. So that's the kind of idea there. That's in essence what wispy in the UK is, all those different words there. In fact, the dictionary goes on to tell us this. This is the definition in dictionary.com. It says overly submissive or compliant, spiritless and tame. So that's, in many ways, the picture that's painted by this word meekness in the world. So whenever Jesus is talking about blessed are the meek, we really need to redeem the meaning of what Jesus really means when he's saying meekness tonight. So he's not talking about blessed are they that are weak and puny and have no backbone and are lightweights and pushovers and show incredible weakness. That's not what he's talking about something very, very different. Meekness does not mean weakness. And I can prove that with one statement tonight. In the Bible, it uses the word meek to describe two of the greatest characters therein. The first one we find in 12 verse 3, and we talked about this verse, I think, 2 weeks ago. Now the man Moses was very meek above all men which were upon the face of the earth. We're looking at a fearless leader, a man who did many incredible things, and I wouldn't associate the word weak with Moses, although he did have weaknesses. And then secondly, we think about Jesus. He says of himself in Matthew 11:29, "Take my yoke upon you, and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls." Friends, was Jesus and was Moses portraits of weakness? I don't think so. I look at Jesus, and especially I look at Moses, and especially Jesus, and I'm not looking at weak men that are pushovers and pansies and lightweights and spineless and tame, according to that dictionary.com description. We're looking at men that had incredible courage, incredible leadership, and yet the Bible describes them as meek. So we need to delve into the scriptures tonight a little bit, and we're going to take some time for the next, the clock at the back tells me it's 7:45 already, so I'm just going to keep preaching or teaching for the next hour and a half, and I think it'll still be 7:45 by the time I'm done. So we'll try and keep track of time. We'll spend about 25, 30 minutes, and then I've got a few questions to split off and discuss at the end. We're going to go through some Bible passages, 2 or 3 mainly, that help us to understand better what this portrait of meekness is all about. So, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. That's Jesus' Beatitude we're looking at tonight. The word meek comes from the original word, and I'm going to murder it in Greek, but I think it's preotes, or at least that's how it looks. Preotes in Greek, and that word, William Barclay gives us a bit of a description about that word, that original language for that word meek. The word preos or preotes carries with it the idea of an animal which has been domesticated, which has been trained to obey the word of command, which has learned to respond to the reins. It is the word for an animal which has learned to accept control. I'm sure you'll have heard the saying, many people say, this is sort of the go-to description biblically. Meekness is power under control. It's not weakness. It's somebody that has incredible courage and incredible strength, incredible power, because it's been placed under the control of Almighty God. That's what we see in Jesus. We saw Jesus do many incredible things because, number one, he was God in the flesh, and secondarily, he was submitted to God the Father in heaven. He and his Father were one. And then we think of Moses. Moses, yes, he wasn't perfect. Yes, he had weaknesses, but for the most part, he placed himself under the control or under the authority of God. And with that, there was not weakness, there was great, great power. Barclay paints that picture of a domesticated animal. It's like a horse running wild that is now put under the reins, has been trained and domesticated, and now is fit for the master's use. The master pulls the rein left, the horse turns left. The master pulls the rein right, it turns right. That horse is just as powerful as before, but now it's reined in under the control and under the power of its ruler. I want to give you a few pictures tonight. Anybody recognize that picture? Hoover Dam. Jonathan and I, Pastor Jonathan and I, we went up to a leadership conference, a church conference up towards Las Vegas direction. And he failed to mention to me how close the Hoover Dam was to there because you don't have to laugh at him tonight, but apparently he's quite afraid of heights. And so he'd been there once before, and he didn't bring up to me that it was nearby. And so I'm looking around, like typing in things to do near Vegas type thing, which could be a dangerous thing to search, really. But somewhere on that list was the Hoover Dam. And I'm like, my goodness, I didn't even know that was near here, but I'd really like to go and see it. So I went and saw it, and it blows your mind. Pictures don't do it justice. And you stand there, and it makes you feel, although it's a man-made structure, it makes you feel incredibly small and incredibly tiny in comparison to this huge dam, the biggest in America. And it powers, I believe, the states of Nevada. It powers the states of Arizona and California. I think those are the three it powers, if I read online correctly. And so there's incredible power there, but you look at that, and it seems quite calm and serene there, doesn't it? You look at it and you can't imagine how much power comes out of something like the Hoover Dam because it's power under control. Water has incredible power, but I want you to imagine, I'm hoping this is a rendered picture and it wasn't last night's news, but I want you to imagine whenever power is released. No longer under control, no longer restrained, it's let run loose and run riot. There's great power there, but there's power to destroy. And in our lives, whenever we as Christians do not place ourselves under the power of God and we let ourselves run free and run wild as such, we have a great ability to destroy our own lives. I read online that whenever the dam is completely full and the lake that it flows from down to the dam, if that was to break, it would be able to cover the state of Connecticut in 10 feet of water. And so that's how much water is there. That's what damage it could do if that power under control of the Hoover Dam got loose. It could cause unparalleled chaos in the surrounding area. And yet, exactly. Yeah, you look at that, and you look at the natural disasters, and we look at water, and yes, we enjoy water. We need water to survive, but whenever you look at the power that it has like this, it sort of helps you to picture the importance of seeing it under control. Another picture, so we see water. How about fire? So in our homes, some of you might have fireplaces. I don't know about you, but back in Northern Ireland, I loved at Christmas time. You have the peat fires back home that the farmers use, and you get that smell throughout the house. And there's nothing more calming or relaxing than just sitting in on a cold night. Not that you know what that feels like in Florida, but sitting in on a cold night and looking at the snow outside, and you've got a blazing fire under complete control in the fireplace. Kids are sitting there at it, smiling and looking. And you wonder, like, that picture looks so calm again, like I said. But whenever you think of fire, it can go both ways. And we've seen across America similar pictures. We've seen many, many wildfires across this country in the last few years. And you see the disasters that can come whenever something is not functioning as it ought, whenever it's out of control. So whenever it comes to meekness, meekness isn't weakness. Meekness is a picture of power. It's a picture of might. It's a picture of strength. But it's been brought under control. It's like the fireplace that contains the fire. As powerful as that fire can be, it contains it and it controls it. It's like the Hoover Dam, where although water can cause such great destruction, whenever it's reined in and controlled the right way, it powers probably the biggest area within America from one source. And so we look at that and we see this portrait of meekness, this importance of meekness, if you will, in our own lives. So I want to help us to define it now. So we get the picture of power under control. That's what the original word means. But biblically speaking, what are some descriptions? What are some things that we can look to demonstrate in our lives that would define meekness? And so we come to Psalm 37. Jesus, as he's teaching, in Matthew 5:5, he says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." He takes directly from a psalmist, Psalm 37, verse 11. It starts by saying, "But the meek shall inherit the earth, and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace." So Jesus takes a statement directly from the psalmist here. And in this psalm, in Psalm 37, we find three very important characteristics. In verse number 11 and verse number 9, and we're going to look back to verse number 5. And it paints, if you will, this portrait of meekness, how we can know that we're demonstrating a meek at heart spirit in our Christian life. And so Jesus refers to Psalm 37. We're going to spend the majority of the rest of our time tonight in Psalm 37 because it shows us these three important attributes. The first thing I want you to see, even before we get into our points, is to contrast this verse, right? It says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." That's in the yellow highlight there. And then look at verse number 9. It says, "For evildoers shall be cut off, but those that wait upon the Lord, they shall inherit the earth." So 2 verses earlier, it says, "Those that wait upon the Lord, they shall inherit the earth." So both those verses had the "they shall inherit the earth" part of the statement. Both of them had a different meaning before it that can easily be paralleled together as one and the same. One talked about the meek inheriting the earth. One talks about here, "they that wait upon the Lord." What does it mean? I'll throw this out there, but what do you think it means to wait upon the Lord? How would we describe that tonight? Yeah? Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. No, it is that idea, submissive of putting myself under another. And specifically here, talking about that importance of putting ourselves under God. So yeah, any other thoughts on that? What does it mean to wait upon the Lord? Power under control. I like that. I've read that somewhere. But that's spot on. It is that idea of power under control, that importance of waiting on the Lord. Any other definitions or ideas? So we add to that, those are great thoughts. And then I would add to that, waiting upon the Lord is that idea of hoping in God, relying on God, leaning upon God. That we're not pressing on upon our own strength and our own way or in our own ability, but rather we're deferring to God. We're power under control. We're putting ourselves under and submitting ourselves to God. We're leaning on Him. We're relying on Him. We're hoping upon Him. And that's that exact picture that we looked at just a minute ago, that idea of power under control. As we wait upon him, we're trusting in him, we're hoping in him, we're relying on him, we're leaning upon God. And so with that in mind, we come to our three thoughts. Now, these are takeaways for you, just little nuggets, if you will, from Psalm 37. The first essence of meekness, and we've touched on it a little bit here, is the trust in God. The trust in God. Verse number 5 there, it says, commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. And that to me is the same kind of idea, that trusting in God, waiting upon God, looking to God, relying on God. That's all sort of painting the same portrait, the same picture. And you may say, well, I've heard all this before. There's nothing new here. I'm kind of bored by this or whatever. But realistically, whenever you bring it home, are we actually doing what it's saying? Are we trusting in him or not? I think for all of us, it's very, very easy to go through life trusting in our own strength, trusting in our own knowledge, trusting in our own ability to get through whatever life throws at us, and we just try and plow on. But the importance of meekness is doing the complete opposite. The importance of meekness is throwing ourselves upon God, leaning on God, relying on God, trusting in the Lord. And so I ask you with a few questions this morning, applications to this first point. Do you fulfill this description of meekness as you're living your Christian life? Do you wait upon the Lord as you should? Do you hope upon him? Do you rely on him in every different stage and an area of life that comes your way? Do we lean wholly on him, and do we trust him every day no matter what life throws at us? Like I said, our default mode as human beings is, I'm strong, I'm independent, I'm mighty, I can do this. And we plow ahead and we try and make stuff happen. And the funny thing is, I love the paradoxes of the Sermon on the Mount, especially in the Beatitudes, but if you had to attribute the word strength or weakness to this in a worldly perspective, what would you apply it to? I'm strong, I'm independent, I'm self-sustainable, I can trust in myself, rely on myself, lean upon myself, look to myself. I'm a self-made man or woman. In the world's eyes, would you say strength or weakness? Strength. After all, that's kind of what the world preaches to us. It tells us to be self-made. It tells us to hope on ourselves, rely on ourselves, lean to ourselves, look to ourselves. After all, if you're not going to look out for yourself, who else will? We want to take control. We want to make it happen. We're strong enough to go it alone. But whenever it really boils down to it, the Bible tells us that those are exactly the opposite. They're pictures of worldly strength, but they're pictures of spiritual weakness. You flip the script upside down, however, and somebody in the world, if they looked at somebody like us tonight as Christians, as we strive to portray meekness as Jesus encourages us to, if they heard us saying, I know that I can't trust myself. I know that I can't rely upon myself. I know that I can't look to myself or lean on myself. Rather, I would rather place my whole strength and my whole reliance upon somebody else, namely God. What would the world say then? The world says, what a weak person you are. I'm sure you've heard it. I've heard it in my Christian life. Whenever I talk about my reliance on God, that I can't go it alone, they say, well, that's just a crutch. That's something that you need to get through life. That's a crutch for you. You're insecure. You need to be self-sufficient. You need to have more self-belief. And the world looks at that and they call it weakness. But the whole point of tonight is the world looks at that and calls it weakness, but God looks at that tonight and he calls it meekness. He says that's meekness, the reliance upon God, the looking to God, the deferring to God, the submitting to God. And the irony of it all is it's polar opposite to what the world views. The world says, do all of these things for yourself. And God says, throw all of yourself upon me. Rely on me and look to me. I ask you tonight with that picture, William Barclay painted that picture. He said that it's like the domesticated animal who's been brought under the reins and is responsive now to the master's leading and guiding. I ask you tonight, and again, this Sermon on the Mount, the whole Sermon on the Mount was to the closest disciples. He'd drawn away from the crowds at this point. Only the 12 were nearby. And so the messages in the Sermon on the Mount, they're not for the lighthearted. It's not just for the general Christian. It's for those that are serious disciples of Jesus. And so they require more than Sunday school answers, some of these questions. And the question that I have for you now is, whenever it comes to that idea of being a domesticated animal as such and being brought under control and being responsive to the reins of the master, who holds the reins to your life? Who holds the reins to our life? And I think if we're honest with ourselves, it's not so easy to answer that, because in some ways and in some areas, both could be true. It depends on the day, and it depends on the area. Some areas are really, really easy to say, God, you take the reins, you take control, you've got this, God. And then there's other areas where we don't want God to even touch. There's other areas where we're like, God, that's off limits. And we'll discuss this a little later. We're going to break into our groups tonight and discuss why that might be sometimes. But I think for me personally, I think sometimes we have our idea of our future and our life, and especially those areas, maybe it's relationships or finances or jobs or family or location. Ellie's preaching in the back there too. Maybe it's any of those things. And if we're honest with ourselves, whenever it comes to those areas, part of us, some small part of us, if we'd like to admit it, is scared that God might ruin those plans. If we defer to God, if we hand over the reins of our life to God, there's a chance that the story might not be written the way we want it to be. And so I asked that question, who holds the reins? And really the answer is probably a bit of both. And I want us to take time at the end of tonight and start thinking through, and you can just write down general for some areas that people in general struggle with, or you can be open and honest with a group that you're in and discuss your own. But what are some areas in your life? I want you to be thinking about this now. What are some areas in your life where you struggle to give over the reins to God? And why do you think that is? Those are a few questions that we're going to look at a little later. And so the world gives us that picture, that idea. And the irony of it all is the Bible tells us this. The world says, trust in yourself, trust your heart. I'm sure you've heard that before, trust your heart. The Bible tells us in Jeremiah 17, verse 9, it says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? As I think about, and I'll go into a few sort of illustrations here, if you will, and it's going to be true of the other parts of this meekness portrait here. I would say there's a number of areas in my life where I think I thought I knew best, and then God came in and showed me very clearly otherwise. And as we go through tonight, I'm going to share a few of those with you. But there's many times in my life whenever I took the world's advice, I trusted my heart, I looked at my own ways, I looked at my own understanding, and I ended up in a destination and in a place that I didn't want to be. Because we trust our heart to our own peril. It's deceitfully wicked above all things you can know. What I've written down here, you want to go ahead and trust in yourself, friend. You want to trust in your heart. I've written down here, and I know this from personal experience, if you do that, enjoy the train wreck that lays ahead. Enjoy the train wreck that lies ahead. Because if our heart's deceitfully wicked above all things and who can know it, if we're letting our heart dictate our actions in our life, and we're not passing the reins over to God as we ought to, there's definitely a train wreck in the near future. And that's why this picture of meekness is so important, because it's not weakness. It's the complete opposite. The world tries to tell us that, but it's this power under control. Under the control of God, there is incredible strength. There's incredible power. There's incredible production and fruit and joyfulness. And as we're looking at the Beatitudes, happiness, that word blessed. And so I encourage you tonight, trusting in yourself equals weakness and stupidity, I've put down here. Trusting in God and placing yourself under the Master, under His power, under His control, letting Him take the reins, that is true strength. And yet it's funny because the world tries to tell us the complete opposite. So we look, first of all, trust in God. Secondly, portrait of meekness, commit your way to Him. Commit your way to Him. Same verse, start of the verse tells us this. Commit thy way unto the Lord. Trust also in Him, and He shall bring it to pass. Commit your way unto Him. And this carries on from the last point. I think if we're honest, it's very, very hard in all areas of life to commit our way unto Him. Like I said, we have our plans and our paths and our ideas and our way. But the portrait of meekness tells us to give it over to Him. I've got here, and I wrote this whenever I was in London, so you'll laugh at the person that wrote the next quote. I've just put American pastor there, so it's very general. So just any pastor in America, you pick him. I think it was probably somebody that I didn't necessarily want to put his name up there because I don't agree with everything he says, and then people are like, oh, he's quoting that guy. But this quote in particular was pretty awesome. It says, meek people have discovered that God is trustworthy. And so they roll their way, their business, their problems, their relationships, their health, their fears, their frustrations, they roll all this onto God. The Hebrew word for that word commit there is the idea of to rule. That's what that word in its essence means. So commit your ways onto God. In other words, roll all of your ways onto God. And it's that idea of reliance again, throwing it upon God, realizing that he's big enough and strong enough and knowing enough to handle anything that you put his way. Does anybody ever feel in the rules that God has given you that you're not quite adequate for them? Have you ever had those moments? I think we all have. I think we've all had those moments, especially, as life gets harder and as responsibilities get bigger and as the rules become more varied. You have many different hats that you wear, whether it's husband or wife, mother or father, son or daughter, work colleague, friend, brother, sister. There's many different hats that you wear, many different relationships and responsibilities that you have. And we learn very, very quickly as Christians that we can't go through life as a Christian alone. We have to throw ourselves upon God. We have to commit or rule all of our ways onto God. Coming to him in meekness and saying, Lord, I need your help. I need your guidance. I need your strength. I need your courage. I need your knowledge here. God, show me how to do what you've called me to do and how to be who you've called me to be. As we think about meekness, that's exactly the sort of person that does that. If you're a meek person, you're able to do those things. If you're struggling with meekness, that's stuff that you struggle with. We struggle with relying on God. We struggle with looking to him. We try to plow ahead and give it our best shot at being a husband or a wife or being a father or a mother or being a friend to that person in need or being that we need to our boss or our work colleague. The meek person looks to God, relies upon God, is guided by God through all the ups and downs of life. And as a Christian, the key tonight is very simply, you don't need to go through your Christian life alone. And yet so often we choose to. So often we go through the hardest moments of our Christian life without once thinking to pray to him. We treat prayer like a fire extinguisher rather than a life raft. We come to it as a matter of last resort and we pray whenever every other option's gone, whenever it ought to be the first thing that we do, is going to God in prayer and saying, God, I'm struggling. God, this is out of my control. God, I need direction. God, I can't handle this. Being a dad, it's hard. Being a husband, it's hard. Being a pastor, it's hard. You've got all these different roles and you've got your own roles. You've got your own responsibilities. And in your own strength, you can't do it. And meekness is realizing that. Meekness is acknowledging our weakness, but under God we can find strength. And that's what we're looking at tonight. We see the very familiar verse there in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. It says, trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. I would say the biggest moment, there's been a number of moments in my life whenever I've come to the realization of my insufficiency. I would say the biggest one, and I'd almost got to the stage after being humbled by God many, many times, where I think mine was almost getting to the stage where God had to convince me that in him I was able. Because it's sort of a fine balance. We don't want to be so prideful that we think we can do it without him, but we don't want to go too far the other way to where we think we can't do anything even with his strength. And so I'd talk myself to the stage whenever I was back in London, I was working in the church at Chelsea, and Pastor John Anderson was my pastor at the time, an American missionary, and he said he was going back to America, and he said, I'm going back, and I've got something I want to ask you, Stephen. I want you to consider taking over the church at Chelsea. I want you to consider whether you would take upon yourself the role that I have right now. My first answer to him was another Northern Irish phrase, but catch yourself on. That means go away. There's no way that I can do that. I'm teaching you a lot of Northern Irish slang tonight, and inadvertently and without knowing it. But I literally said, there's no way I can do that. I struggled at that point and still do to an extent. Sometimes to write a sermon in a month, let alone 3 in a week. I can't do that, Pastor. How can I do? And I've come to find out preaching's the easy part of pastoring. It's all the other stuff that comes along with it. It's the difficult part. And I sat there and looked at it and I'm like, God, there's no way I can do this. And I'll be honest with you, for 2 months, I wasn't even willing to pray about it. I wasn't even willing to come to God and say, God, if this is your will, show me. And so for 2 months, I was obstinate. I was saying, no, there's no chance. And I was very much the other way to the portrait that we're looking at. It was almost pride and pride wrapped up in an ultra humility, if you will, if that makes sense. In the sense that I was like, there's no way I can be used by God. And it was so far the other way, it was unhealthy. God, literally, I went through a number of different answers to that prayer. God used guests. So Pastor John, this is the funny part, and I've learned preachers do this because I do it too, but he deliberately preached for a number of weeks applications that would help me to think, well, if I'm looking for an answer to prayer, that's my answer. God's pastor in the pulpit to become the pastor, but he wants me to be pastor, and he's asked me to be pastor, so he's preaching at me, so I'll do it. So clear off, pastor, I'm not listening to you. So I decided there was a Sunday that came where there was 2 guest preachers in, one on Sunday morning, one on Sunday night, and I thought, here's my chance. Pastor John's nowhere to be seen. He's not going to preach at me this morning. I'm just going to pray, God, these 2 men, and now Pastor May went to these men beforehand, I have no clue, and said, see this guy Stephen down here, he needs convincing. But whether he did or didn't, those 2 men literally preached identical messages with different titles to the same conclusion. Talking about the importance of relying on God, and when we look to him, what he can do through our strength and through our weakness. And 2 different messages. He was away for one Sunday, they came in, and without a shadow of a doubt, I knew they were preaching at me. Pastor John then went on to say, I want to go around, I've got a few months before I got to leave. I need to at least talk to the church members about this. It's getting time to where I've got to go. I need to at least float the idea out there and just tell them I'm thinking about you becoming the pastor and see what their response is. I was like, well, this is where it dies in the water. This is it. It's not happening. And he went around every single person in that church, and he came back and said every single person was for it, not against it. And 3 of them in particular, before he had even brought up a replacement's name, they said my name. And I was blown away by it. I was like, there's no way on earth that that's true. I went to tell my mum all these different stories. I talked to her about the sermons, the different confirmations that I got. There's more I could share. And my mum literally said, Stephen, written it on the wall for you what you're supposed to do here. For the first 2 months, I didn't get an answer. I didn't have a peace. I didn't have anything because I wasn't even willing to pray about it. And many of us, we don't want to pray in pride. We don't want to pray in self-reliance. We don't want to pray because we're looking to ourselves and want to control our situation. And in some ways, that's what I was doing in a reverse about way. I didn't want to become the pastor of that church at the start, and I didn't even want to entertain the thought or pray about it. But as I trusted in him and acknowledged him and looked to him for his ways and his path, it became very, very clear, and he directed that. In your life, there's going to come crossroads where you have a choice. You're either going to rely on God or rely on yourself. You're either going to look to your own understanding, and prayer will be a last resort, or prayer will be a first resort, and you'll find your answers. And so as we go through this life, if we're going to display this portrait of meekness, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. If we're going to display this portrait of meekness, firstly, trusting in God, looking to him, committing our ways on to him, looking to him for direction and for help in areas that we are underqualified and are insufficient in. And he will help us and he will show us the way. One other sillier way of illustrating it is this, and this is sort of, Julie is away, so it's all good, although it's going to be recorded, so that's all good too. But I started dating whenever I was about 16, and the day that I started dating, the London Underground got bombed, and so I say that the day I started dating, disasters started happening. And so I dated a number of different teenage years, and I got to the stage where honestly at 20, 21, I was sitting there thinking, I'm terrible at this. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to try something different, because I've been just pretty much picking any girl that'll say yes and date her. And instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break for a little while, and I'm going to commit to 2 years of singleness and spend 2 years just trying to be the man that I need to be, so that whenever the right girl comes along, I'll be the right guy. And that's still a work in progress, might I add. But whenever Single Vision rolled around, and that's the conference that a lot of the young adults are going to next month here in St. Pete, I came over with Pastor John to Single Vision Conference 2011. At that stage, I've been single for 2.5 years. I got to the stage where, in all honesty, at the start of that time, there's girls would come along and they're like, oh yeah, she's nice, she's a godly girl, and I could certainly talk to her, and I'd like to pursue that. And after a couple of years, I got to the stage where I wasn't even really thinking about it. I just sort of left it in God's hands and decided, God, you know, in your timing, whenever it's right, the next girl that I date, I want her to be my wife. And I'll be honest, whenever Single Vision, which we've renamed Mingle Vision Conference, whenever I came around, I wasn't even looking at the time. And I think many couples, especially Christian couples, have this testimony or this story that whenever they stop looking, God sort of starts working. And it was in that conference, I looked across the room and saw this gorgeous dark-haired girl, and I'm like, I have to talk to her. And just a couple of days talked for a little while, went back to London, and over long distance we kept a talking relationship, which turned into a dating relationship, which turned into a married relationship, which turned into 3 children. And so all that to say, I was doing things my way. I was trusting in my ability, my knowledge, what I thought was best. And it was literally that train wreck ahead thing that I was talking about earlier. But as soon as I started trusting in God, looking to him, letting go of the reins of that area of my life, I talked about there's some areas in our life we don't want to let go of the reins. That was one of those areas for a while. And I let go of the reins and I gave God the reins, and it was the greatest thing that could ever happen. And there's those areas in your life where you're going to find it hard to let go of the reins of your life. And I can promise you those are probably the areas where you'll see the greatest fruit if you'll give it over to God. Because he can write far better stories than you can. And he can write a far better life than you could ever envision. You have your plan for life, but sometimes it's when life gets off script that God does his greatest work. And so I come to my final point tonight, and I want you to close with this. Portrait of meekness, trust in God, commit your ways to him, silent or quiet before God. Verse number 7, let rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Fret not thyself because of him who prospereth in his way, because the man who bringeth wicked devices to pass. And so it says, rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. I don't know if you've realized, but in the world around us, we have a crazy world. People are pushing their agendas. People are trying to have their voice be heard. And it's chaos out there of people trying to make their way happen. For us as Christians, John Piper writes this. He says, about this particular statement about waiting on God, stillness in God, resting in the Lord. He says this idea of resting in the Lord, it says it doesn't mean becoming lazy. It means they're free of frenzy. They have a kind of steady calm that comes from knowing that God is omnipotent and that he has their affairs under his control and that he's gracious and will work out things for the best. Meek people have a quiet steadiness about their lives in the midst of upheaval. The meek person, everything in the world can be crazy around them, but because they're trusting in God, committing their ways onto him, and resting in him, that quiet, steady calmness of reliance upon him. Everything else is chaotic, but there's this calm steadiness of the meek person. I love the bit in different font there, different color. It says, steady calm that comes from knowing that God is omnipotent, God is almighty, God is all powerful. There's nothing that he can't do. And if you pass the reins of your life over to him, you shouldn't be scared. It should bring forth excitement because he has your affairs under control. And so as we come to a close, the world looks at meekness and it says weakness. God looks at meekness and he tells us there's great strength in it. If we'll trust in him, if we'll commit our ways to him, and if we'll rest in the Lord and have that calm, quiet steadiness before God, there's incredible strength that can be found in meekness. Friends, tonight, happiness comes when we place ourselves, and that word blessed means happy. Happiness comes from meekness. Happiness comes when we place ourselves under the control and under the command of Almighty God. These are all words from behind a little desk on a Wednesday night. Whenever that hits the reality of your life, that's when it becomes hard. But that's the aim, is giving the reins of our life over to him, trusting in him, committing our ways to him, and steadily, quietly, patiently waiting on him to work. Meekness isn't weakness. Meekness is power under control. And so I close with a few things tonight for you to think about. We'll split off for about 5 to 10 minutes here. A few questions, and I've talked about these. And you can be as honest with your group, or you can be as generic. By that I mean you can talk about things that general people may struggle with, or if you want to share your own stuff, you're welcome to, but we don't want to force you to do it and you don't want to tonight. Number 1 there, what areas of our lives do we find hard to give God control over? Number 2 there, what are some reasons we struggle to give God the reins of these areas of our life? And number 3, can you think of times when you trusted in God, committed your ways to him? What was the outcomes? That's the likes of my dating story. The outcome of trusting in God, commit my ways to him, was being married to the most beautiful woman in this building right now. The second one was whenever I came to pastor in Chelsea Church. I had my ideas, I had my thoughts, I had my ways. It ended up putting me in one of the hardest positions in my life, one of the most out-of-depth experiences I've ever had, but it was one of the most growing periods of my life spiritually. And so those are the kind of ideas there with what I mean by that question. So I want you to go away, have a wee think over those. We'll come back. It's currently 13 minutes to the hour. We'll come back at 5 minutes to, and we'll discuss some of those answers. So you got about 7 or 8 minutes there. If you need me to flick over to number 3, just let me know at any point.